The water just flowed into there.
So what we did here, this machine does in just a few minutes what it took Mother Nature thousands of years to do. And that is to turn quartz rock into mud.
Wow.
Over thousands of years it took the weather to render this quartz down into a sand. The gold falls out of the sand and you just take the gold out of it.
Wow.
It just took a few minutes to do that. So this is the commercial way of getting gold out of quartz. Back in the old days of the gold rush, the first days of the gold rush, people would come in to California. They would find that sand that had been sitting there for thousands of years. They would stick a frying pan or a bowl down in the sand.
Yeah.
And there'd be gold in there. Now the gold they found out was 18 times heavier than anything else in the pan. So they put water in it, they shake it. Where does the gold go? The gold's heavy, so it goes down to the bottom. And then all they had to do is to take the material off the top and hopefully there'd be some gold down there. But what they didn't know is when people started coming into California, lining all the rivers and the creeks, all that gold didn't take long to start disappearing, and people were working harder and harder and harder to get the gold that was down in the rivers and the creeks. But there were other gold rushes in the world. There were gold rushes dating back to ancient Chinese, ancient Roman times. They knew that all this gold that was in the rivers and the creeks was the first stuff that was going to disappear. And the way to keep mining in one area and not have to move to a new area was to dig down in the ground, find these quartz formations, bring them up, and beat the heck out of them. Turn them into sand so they could pan it out. Well, that worked, but you have to spend a lot of energy beating this stuff into pieces and making it into sand. So back in the ancient times, they decided rather than doing that, they would get trees. They'd cut trees down, stand them up on end, put a little bit of metal underneath them, lift the tree up and drop it on the quartz. Lift it up and drop it on the quartz. After a period of time, that quartz would turn into sand. They said, well, this is great. Let's take 5 trees and let's stick them next to each other and let's create some kind of mechanism that would lift them and drop them. That became the stamp mill. Those were used in ancient Chinese times. Chinese taught them to the Arabs, then the Saxon tribes started using them, then the Cornish people used them. During the first gold rush in North America in the 1830s, in Georgia, Tennessee, they brought the idea of the stamp mill over to the United States. And it worked great. They were cutting trees down, spinning them on end, and lifting them and dropping them, and they were mining gold, hard rock gold. That worked great. So during the California gold rush, they brought the idea of the stamp mill over here. They set the stamp mills up. Didn't work worth a darn. The quartz here was so hard that it was breaking the trees. They spent more time replacing the trees than getting gold out. So here come along the Cornish miners and the German miners, which knew about this kind of thing. They were the mining engineers. They came to California, they saw what was happening. They said, heck, we're going to have to reinvent the stamp mill. So they went to San Francisco where the first foundries were being built. They said, redesign these stamp mills. We need to make them stronger. So instead of trees, they have these long iron rods weighing 1,000 pounds each. There's one right behind you. One right behind you on the ground there.
Oh, anybody want to volunteer to pick it up?
So the idea is to lift these monsters about 8 inches and drop them. Lift them and drop them. And they turn that quartz and pulverize it into sand. It worked great. Then they put them in the machines here and they started powering them. Well, the first power was water wheels. You had a river here. It would, the current of the river would turn the bull wheel. Bull wheel turns these cans. The cans lift the stamps and drop. It worked great during the winter. But during the summer, they had to stop the stamp mill, not enough water. So they got the idea, let's go ahead and power these. Let's get a steam engine. They said, well, that's going to be kind of hard because we have to bring the steam engines over from the East Coast down around the Horn of South America. By the time they get in here, it's going to be a lot of trouble to get them up here. But there were easier steam engines to be found. All these people that have been coming up here for the gold rush, a lot of them came in through San Francisco Harbor. They came in on ships. These people were so excited about the gold up here, they abandoned the ships in the harbor. The whole harbor was glutted with ships. And most of these ships had a steam engine on them. So they said, let's go down here, let's rip the steam engines off of the ships, bring them up here, hook them to the stamp mills. They worked. They worked great. The people that own these stamp mills were big businesses. I tell people this is kind of like a Walmart coming to town. If you couldn't make a living on the rivers and the creeks panning, you went to work for a guy that had one of these stamp mills. And you could earn a wage. The only problem is, when they set these steam engines up, what does it take to make steam? Fire. What does it take to make fire? They had to keep cutting all the wood up here. In about 20 years, there was no more wood up here. They had to keep looking for wood, going farther and farther out. After a while, they were spending more money in freight getting the wood in here than the gold that they got out of the stamp mills. So it was kind of a self-limiting thing. Now these stamp mills, this is a 5-stamp mill, 5,000 pounder they call it. They had 10,000 pounders, 20, 40, 60, 80, even 100 stamp mills. They were inside of buildings. They were loud. They were so loud the guys working on them would lose their hearing in a few days if they didn't do something about it. So they had to take cotton or wool, dip it in olive oil and shove it in their ears. And then the owner of the mill was kind enough to have a bucket with beeswax in it with a candle underneath it. They'd take a scoop of warm beeswax and shove that on their ears. That was their hearing protection. People were told you could hear the gold fields long before you could see them, and you could actually hear them up to 40 miles away. So they were very loud. But what I try to tell people is that these stamp mills, they put down the roots in an area, you know, like a Walmart. They provide employment for the people. Pretty soon, the miners that couldn't make a living on the rivers and the creeks, they had a steady wage. They could call for their families. They could build cabins, have kids. Schools were built, churches were built, stores were built. Wow. Pretty soon, the mining camp becomes a mining town. Right. The towns would evolve maybe into a city. So all the places up and down the Mother Lode here are here today because these stamp mills came in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. Now this is, again, I said these were loud things. They were big business. They provided the gold for the nation. Well, how did you get the gold out of this stuff? You could pan it out, like I said, or what's kind of interesting is they used a little bit of chemistry even back in the 1800s, a little bit of science. These plates that I'm standing on were made out of copper, same as a copper penny. They would paint mercury on these plates. They didn't know, or they didn't care about mercury being toxic. Right. All they knew is mercury liked to stick to other metals. It liked to stick to copper. When all this mud washed over these plates, mercury grabbed onto the gold. And it amalgamated the gold. It would bond to the gold. After a while, they'd be scraping up this putty. There was an amalgamation. It was a mixture of mercury and gold. It looked like this. It would literally be dripping with mercury. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning about mercury is it was more expensive than gold. It was dangerous to make. They only mined it in the San Jose area. They found cinnabar. They would dig up cinnabar and bake it. When you bake cinnabar, mercury weeps out of it. Dangerous thing to do because if you breathe mercury vapors, you could die in a few days. So it was dangerous to make. It was heavy. Mercury was heavy. A little bottle like this was 70 pounds. By the time it got up here to the gold fields, it was truly worth more than the gold, so they had to make sure they got all of the mercury back. So they're gathering these all day long, and then they got to separate the gold out. What they did is they got a contraption called a retort. It's kind of like a still. They put it in this cup, but picture this cup being 1 to 3 feet wide. They put all the balls, amalgam balls in there. They would clamp a big lid on it, They would be propped up underneath the fire. They would have this tube going into a bucket of water. They heat it up. The mercury would turn into a gas, go through the tube, cool down, turn back into mercury. They got all the mercury back. They put it back on the plates. What would be left after that?
Wow.
Puddle of gold.
Wow.
So they poured that gold off into a brick mold called an ingot, and they call Wells Fargo the secure stage line to guard that ingot, take it down to San Francisco to the mint, where they take all the impurities out of it and make it into coinage. Now, so these things were loud. You can hear them up to 40 miles away. They wore down a lot. That stamp there, that big stamp, is a brand new one. That did all the crushing. Right next to it, you see that little puny stamp. That's the same stamp 1 week later.
What?
Every week they're replacing these stamps.
1 week?
Yeah.
Wow.
The owners of these mills, they were businessmen. They knew that to get these things going, you had to start your fire underneath the steam engine. It took a lot of time and energy to get this started. They said, never stop my mill to replace the stamp.
So this is 24/7.
24/7.
How they did it was.
If this had to be replaced right here, you hang this one up. These would still be pounding away on each side of you. These poor guys would have to get in here with a piece of dynamite, stick the dynamite in here, light it, make a run for it. They would blow that small stamp off. Then they get the big stamp, have to muscle it in place, lower the stamp on it, get it hooked up, and get it going. All the while, these stamps are inches away from their fingers. And I have a lot of articles of guys losing their fingers, losing half their hands. And, you know, there was no Cal OSHA, there was no unemployment. You were just out of a job and there was somebody waiting in line to take your place.
To take your place, exactly.
But these are what settled the West out here. This is the moneymaker for California and for the United States. And these provided a stable environment. These were actually the pinnacle of a factory process all the way up until Henry Ford started the assembly line for the automobile. So these were considered a high-tech factory process. And stamp mills are still used to this day, not in America, but in South Africa and some of the third world nations are still using stamp mills.
And is that because it's easier over there to crush it? Is it a little easier than
It's old technology. They're easy to make. They don't have to worry so much about safety.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
they'd never. Cal OSHA, anyone would not let these things run today, and we
Not
run
at
these
all.
under a special license.
Yeah.
Just because of historical purposes.
It's amazing, though. So amazing.
That one, we have a 2-stamp in the back that's almost ready to go. You know, there's some places, there's a place in Arizona that has a 10-stamp mill that they operate.
Wow.
It's a big deal to operate these things.
There's one in Georgetown, too, that works.
Yeah. Sierra City. Okay, folks, thanks a lot.
Oh my God, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.